Шановні колеги, ми продовжуємо роботу.
Dear colleagues, we continue our Q&A, and now I give the floor to First Deputy Head of Special Monitoring Mission of OSCE, Alexander Hug.
Good afternoon, dear friends. If there is one thing we learned since the start of this conflict, it is that there are no certainties. Violence erupts unannounced in the most unexpected places at the most unexpected times. In Yasinovata, for example, on Sunday, our monitors heard 186 explosions, of which 140 occurred within 1 hour, 1 to 6 kilometers west-southwest of their position. And then the next day, Yasinovata was quiet. For that reason, even though we have registered fewer ceasefire violations than usual, I'm hesitant to say that things have gone better. Violence ebbs and flows. Unpredictability is driven in general by non-compliance with the Minsk agreements. Specifically, it is driven by the dangerous proximity of the sites in key locations along the contact line. On Tuesday, our monitors were in so-called DPR-controlled Tukochayevsk, southwest of Donetsk, where they saw where this proximity leads to. Even though the so-called DPR turned the town into a media circus, our monitors did note craters and some limited damage there. Thankfully, no one was injured or killed in what appears to have been an overnight shelling incident. The episode did, however, remind me of what had happened in nearby Olenivka 3 weeks ago. It underlined for me that there is no security in the so-called security zone as long as the sides refuse to disengage and to withdraw their guns. Dear friends, disengagement was indeed one of the key ideas emerged from the Normandy 4 meeting in Berlin last week. According to the OSCE chairperson in office, Foreign Minister Steinmeier, the participants agreed on, among other things, and I quote, the disengagement of forces along the line of contact with a view of establishing demilitarized zones with concrete coordinates and deadlines. Its importance was underlined by Minister Steinmeier, and I quote again, security is not everything, he said, yet without security there is nothing. Nobody expects this to happen overnight, but it must start somewhere, and it must start now. And there are places where this process is best suited to start. Stanitsia Luhanska and Solote Popasna, both in the Luhansk region. Most violence in Luhansk region occurs in these places. If the violence were to stop there, the crossing route in the latter could be finally opened and people in the former could cross in safety. At present, the Stanica Luhanska bridge bears the risk to those crossing the damaged bridge because it remains unpredictably as elsewhere along the contact line. On Monday, for example, an explosion occurred just 300 meters from the bridge as people crossed the river. On Tuesday night, we recorded approximately 30 explosions in the vicinity of the bridge. These places are also heavily mine infested. The sites have already agreed in Minsk to demine at entry and exit checkpoints and along approach roads to crossing points. Latest figures of the United Nations suggest that over 2/3 of civilian casualties in Donbass are currently caused by mines and unexploded ordnance. The immediate need for such mine action is therefore obvious and indeed imperative. Last week in so-called DPR-controlled Rosipne, just southeast of so-called DPR-controlled Torres, our monitors saw a worrying example of the need for mine awareness. They saw a young boy playing with ammunition and remnants of rockets and mortars. Keep in mind, Rosipne is far from the contact line. We know that the mapping of minefields has been less than perfect, but for sure, most of them are in the security zone, and in particular, along crossing routes or potential crossing routes. Despite these risks, people clearly need to cross. On Tuesday morning, our monitors observed at least 150 people at Ukraine Armed Forces checkpoint north of the Stanica Luhanska bridge, waiting to leave government-controlled areas. And 500 people were at the same checkpoint waiting to enter government-controlled areas. Many are crossing to collect pensions, do shopping, visit family and friends. They are also crossing because Luhansk region constitutes, or at least it used to constitute, an integrated economic and commercial space. In general, food growing areas to the north are dependent on markets in the south of the region. People in more urbanized areas are dependent on food from the north. On Monday, our monitors saw how this conflict has ruptured this pattern. In government-controlled Velika Chernichivka, 45 kilometers north of Luhansk, they spoke to several residents. They explained that most people there were dependent on agriculture. They added that they had difficulties, because of the contact line, in selling their produce in the nearest big market, Luhansk city. If we can build on the momentum generated in Berlin and take advantage of the relative calm, much is possible. The sides can disengage in Stanica Luhanska and Solote Popasna. The areas can be demined and people can cross in safety. And economic and commercial ties that once befitted everyone can be re-established. If normalization can be restored to these places, it points to wider possibilities. People in Yasinovato, Pavlopil and Svetlodarsk, and indeed all along the contact line, want the same. They all want to live free of fear and danger. They want their children to go to school. They want to go to work. They want to walk the streets without fear of shrapnel tearing them apart. They want to farm their land without anti-tank mines killing and injuring them, as just happened in Pavlopil yesterday. For all of this to work, we need to have a functional joint center for control and coordination. For this reason, I led a SMM delegation to Solidar this Monday. We need to, alongside the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, to coordinate our future efforts in line with the Normandy 4 outcomes. The Joint Center for Control and Coordination still has to be further empowered to operate jointly and effectively on both sides of the contact line. But with political will, this too is possible. And one possibility leads to others. I have crossed the Stanica Luhanska bridge many times and have always been struck by the irony of how a bridge meant to connect people now divides them. I return to Solidar next week, where I hope to build on progress made this week. If we seize this moment and start to take small steps now, I hope that that bridge will once again serve its true purpose. As usual, at the end of my statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 703 monitors, of whom 581 are deployed in the east. In addition, there are 302 Ukrainian colleagues and 82 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Thank you for your attention.
Дякую, пане Хук. Колеги, чи є запитання або уточнення?
Are there any questions? Thank you.
Third question. Previous briefings, you very often mentioned that both sides are deployed as their position very close to each other along the contact line. During the last week, do you see any changes of this, or is there nothing changed? Like they still standing there very close to each other? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. We have noted a reduction overall in ceasefire violations. However, the risks remain, and one of these risks is indeed that the sites are too close to each other. Nothing has changed in this regard. However, the Normandy 4 ministers have discussed the idea of disengagement. And I quote again Minister Steinmeier, "The disengagement of forces along the line of contact with a view to establish demilitarized zones with concrete coordinates and deadlines was one of the subject the ministers discussed. Our interaction with the Joint Center for Control and Coordination aims at the same point, which is to encourage and to support the sites to disengage. There are other risks still there. Most urgently to be addressed are the numerous heavy weapons still in the security zone and those that have disappeared from the holding sites behind the withdrawal lines. Thank you.
Дякую, пане Хук. Чи є ще запитання або уточнення? We don't have any more questions, so at this point the press conference is finished. Thank you for coming and
Thank you.
looking forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Шановні колеги, наступна подія буквально за
The next